"Where do we start?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. Elysia looked at him, her mind working quickly. "We need to find the hidden sanctuaries. There are ancient temples scattered across the galaxy, remnants of my people's civilization. They were built to protect the power, to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. If we can find them, we might be able to unlock the secrets of controlling it, maybe even sever the link between me and the energy." "You think there's a way to disconnect from it?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowed. "After everything we've seen, I'm not sure there's any going back." Elysia's eyes darkened. "Maybe there isn't, but I don't have a choice. The power is too dangerous. If I let it control me, I could destroy everything." Celine stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Then we'll fight with you. Together, we can find those temples. We'll fight not just for survival, but for the future we want to build." Elysia felt a surge of gratitude for the people who had stood by her. They had risked their lives to fight alongside her, to protect the last of her people's legacy. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. "I won't let you down," Elysia said, her voice stronger now, filled with a quiet resolve. "We'll find a way to stop them. Together." Days passed as the rebel camp prepared for their next move. Elysia and Marcus spent hours poring over ancient texts, searching for clues about the locations of the hidden temples. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the power they sought to protect, or destroy, was far more dangerous than either of them had realized. The temples were scattered across the galaxy, each one holding a piece of the puzzle that could unlock the true potential of Elysia's bloodline. But as the days went on, the feeling of unease only grew. Elysia knew the factions would regroup. They would stop at nothing to capture her, to control the energy that pulsed within her veins. And if they succeeded, there would be no galaxy left to fight for. Marcus remained by her side, offering his unwavering support as they planned their journey. They would travel to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, to places no one had dared go in centuries. And with every step, they would be one step closer to uncovering the truth of the power that lay within her. "I'm ready," Elysia said one evening as they stood on the edge of the camp, watching the sun set over the barren landscape of Valter. The sky was a deep shade of purple, streaked with the last rays of daylight. "We've lost so much already, but we can't afford to lose any more." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with quiet understanding. "We'll find a way to make it right. I believe in you, Elysia." And for the first time in a long time, Elysia believed in herself too. She had spent so many years hiding from her power, afraid of what it could do. But now she was no longer running. She was standing tall, ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy had forgotten her once, but it would never forget her again. A new beginning. The sounds of battle faded into the distance as Elysia stood amidst the aftermath. The rebels who had fought alongside her were scattered around the camp, some tending to the wounded, others still standing in stunned silence. The night was still, broken only by the faint hum of engines and the occasional crackle of fire. The stars above seemed to glow a little brighter, as if even the heavens themselves were watching the shift in the galaxy's tides. Elysia's breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling from the energy she had just unleashed. She could feel the power still pulsing within her, a constant hum that filled her senses. It was no longer something she could control with ease. It was a part of her, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. But it had come at a price. Her mind swam with the weight of what she had done. And for a moment, she felt like she might collapse from the sheer exhaustion. "Elysia." Marcus's voice broke through the fog in her mind, pulling her back to reality. She turned to see him approaching, his face grim but filled with relief. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though she didn't quite believe it herself. I think so," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what happened. I felt it, the power, and I let it go." Marcus came to stand beside her, his eyes scanning the camp, still on alert. "You did more than just let it go. You saved us all." You saved Valter. Elysia's gaze wandered across the camp, taking in the wreckage of the enemy ships scattered around them, now nothing more than burning husks of metal. She had unleashed the full force of her power on them, and in doing so, she had not only saved the rebels but perhaps changed the course of the galaxy's future. But the cost was heavy, and she knew this wasn't the end. "We can't stay here," Elysia said softly, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the remnants of the enemy fleet. "They'll come again, and next time, they'll be better prepared." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "We're not done yet, are we?" Elysia shook her head. "No, we've won this battle, but the war isn't over. The factions will never stop hunting me, and if they find the heart of Valter, if they harness the power here, they'll destroy everything we've worked for." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers. "So what do we do now? Where do we go?" Elysia's gaze turned to the horizon. The twin moons of Valter rose higher, casting an eerie glow across the landscape. "We can't stay here. We need to find a way to stop the factions once and for all. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for the future of the galaxy. We have to go to the heart of Valter. We have to secure the power before they do." Celine, the rebel leader, appeared beside them, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, but with a fire in her eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We've seen what they can do when they have the power. They'll stop at nothing to take control. But we can't do it alone." Elysia turned to her, her heart heavy with the weight of what needed to be done. "I know, but we have to try." A deep silence fell over the camp as the rebels gathered around, taking stock of their resources and preparing for the next phase of their mission. The victory they had achieved was important, but it was just the beginning. Elysia could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. Elysia's eyes darkened as she turned toward the distant mountain range that loomed in the background, its jagged peaks cutting through the sky. The power here, inside the planet, it's more than just energy. It's a living force. The factions don't just want me. They want control of the heart of Valter. The energy there could reshape the entire galaxy. It could be weaponized. Marcus felt a chill run through him. "You mean, if they get their hands on that power, they could change everything," Elysia finished for him. "And they will. We need to reach the heart of Valter first. If we don't, they'll control the galaxy with it." Celine glanced at the group of rebels, a determined look in her eyes. "Then we move out. It's now or never." The battle began as the fleet of enemy ships descended upon Valter, their massive silhouettes cutting across the sky. The rebels had gathered every last fighter they could find, but they were outnumbered. Marcus's heart pounded as the first blasts of enemy fire lit up the night sky, cutting through the camp like a knife. The rebels sprang into action, their weapons blazing as they fought with everything they had. But it wasn't just the guns and the bombs that made the air so charged with tension. It was Elysia. As the first shots were fired, she felt the pulse of the energy inside her stir, as if the planet itself was calling to her. The power that had been dormant for so long was now alive, thrumming beneath her skin. "Elysia, now's your chance," Celine shouted over the chaos, her voice barely audible above the sounds of battle. "Channel the energy. Use it." For a moment, Elysia hesitated, her mind flashing back to all the times she had been told to control her power, to hide it. She had spent so many years burying it deep inside her, afraid of what might happen if she unleashed it. But now, with the galaxy's fate hanging in the balance, she knew there was no other choice. Closing her eyes, she reached deep within herself, connecting with the force that had always been a part of her bloodline. The energy surged through her, and for the first time, she didn't fight it. She welcomed it, allowed it to fill her, to consume her. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the energy surged outward, a shockwave of power radiating from her, sending ripples through the air. The enemy ships above faltered, as if the very fabric of reality had been momentarily disrupted. A blast of energy shot from Elysia's outstretched hand, tearing through the air like a thunderstrike. It hit one of the ships, and with a deafening explosion, the vessel disintegrated into nothing. Elysia's eyes flew open, glowing with the intensity of the power she now wielded. "It's working," Marcus shouted, awe in his voice. But Elysia wasn't finished. She felt the power within her, raw and untamed, and she knew she could do more. The battle raged around her, but she was no longer just a bystander. She was the storm. With a fierce determination, she extended her hands, her fingers crackling with energy. A massive surge of power shot out from her, ripping through the enemy ships in a series of devastating explosions. One by one, they fell from the sky, their engines burning out as Elysia's power tore them apart. But as the last ship fell, Elysia's vision blurred. The energy within her surged uncontrollably, a wild force she could barely control. She felt herself losing grip, the power threatening to consume her completely. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she stumbled, her hands shaking. For a moment, it seemed as if the power would overwhelm her. "Elysia," Marcus shouted, rushing to her side. "You have to control it." I can't," she gasped, her voice filled with pain. The energy inside her was too much, too powerful. She felt like she was being torn apart by it. But just as the energy was about to consume her, she heard a voice, soft and clear in her mind. "Focus, Elysia. Focus. You are the power, but you must control it. Let it flow, not destroy." It was a voice she knew, her mother's voice, a memory from the past. With a gasp, Elysia focused, bringing the energy under control. Slowly, the power began to calm, the wild currents settling into a steady pulse. She opened her eyes, the glow fading as she regained her balance. "I did it," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The battle was over. The enemies had been defeated. The galaxy had underestimated her, but they would never make that mistake again. Inside the tent, Celine took a seat at a large makeshift table and gestured for them to sit. "We've been fighting a war of survival for years," she said, her voice low and serious. "The galaxy doesn't care about us. But you, what you're hiding, what you could be, could change everything." Elysia took a deep breath. The time for hiding was over. "I've never known how to control it. The power inside me, it's ancient. It's tied to my bloodline, to my people. But I'm afraid that if I try to unlock it, I could lose control. I don't want to be a weapon." Celine leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "What if you don't have a choice? The galaxy won't give you the luxury of staying hidden. You have to decide. Will you hide from your power, or will you use it to fight back?" Elysia's heart raced. Celine was right. The galaxy wouldn't leave her alone. But could she truly control this power? Could she harness it without destroying everything in her path? "I don't know if I can," she said softly. Celine's gaze softened. "Then let us help you. We don't have all the answers, but we'll be with you every step of the way. We're not just fighting for freedom. We're fighting for you too, for the future you can create." Marcus placed a hand on Elysia's shoulder, offering silent support. Elysia took a deep breath, looking around the room at the faces of the rebels who had come to stand with her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's fight. The battle of the lost worlds." The winds of Valter were harsh, howling through the rugged landscape as Marcus and Elysia stood at the edge of the rebel camp. The night sky above was filled with stars, but there was a foreboding stillness in the air. It was as though the planet itself could sense what was coming. The rebellion had been quiet for too long, but now everything was about to change. The stakes had risen higher than either of them could have anticipated. Elysia wasn't just hiding from her past anymore. She was preparing to confront it head-on. The air in the camp was tense. Word had spread that the factions hunting Elysia were closing in. The rebel leaders had received intelligence about a massive fleet approaching, one that would not only wipe out Valter, but also capture the last of the royal bloodline to claim its power. Marcus had known it was coming, but the scale of the threat was more terrifying than he could have imagined. "We don't have much time," Elysia said, her voice steady, but filled with a weight that made Marcus's chest tighten. She stood at the entrance to the command tent, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Once they arrive, they'll obliterate this entire camp. We need to make a stand here and now." Marcus turned to look at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. The power that had once terrified her now burned with intensity, alive in every fiber of her being. It was as if the dormant force inside her had sensed the coming battle, and it was ready to awaken fully. "Are you sure you can control it?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet, the question hanging in the air between them. He had seen glimpses of what Elysia was capable of, but he didn't know if she was ready for the full weight of the power that resided within her. The galaxy's factions weren't just after her, they were after the energy that she could wield. Elysia turned toward him, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "I don't know, but I have no choice now." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. She wasn't just the last of a royal bloodline. She was the key to something far greater, a power that could either save the galaxy or tear it apart. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind them. It was Selene, the leader of the rebels. Her face was set with determination as she approached, flanked by a group of seasoned fighters. The air around her seemed charged with purpose. "We're ready," Selene said, her tone firm. "We'll fight with you, Elysia. We know what's at stake. This is more than just survival. It's a chance to reclaim what the galaxy stole from us." Elysia's gaze softened as she met Selene's eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone. She was no longer just the last of her kind, hiding from her power. Now she was leading a rebellion, a fight not just for her future, but for the future of the galaxy itself. "Thank you," Elysia said, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "But we need to do more than just fight. We need to stop them from reaching the heart of this planet." Selene raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Elysia didn't respond immediately. She had no idea whether this was the right place, but at this point, it felt like the only place left. She had run from her past for so long, hiding from her power, pretending she wasn't the last of a royal bloodline that could change the course of the galaxy. But now, it was impossible to ignore. The power inside her was growing stronger with every passing day, every breath she took. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But I don't have any other choice. The power inside me, it's waking up. I can feel it, Marcus. It's calling to me." Marcus stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. He had seen the look in her eyes, the look of someone on the edge of something vast and terrifying. He had learned that Elysia wasn't just the last of her kind. She was something more. She was the key to an ancient power that could change the fate of entire worlds. And the longer they stayed on this planet, the more that power would consume her, if it hadn't already. "You've been hiding it," Marcus said, his voice gentle but insistent. "The power, you're afraid of it." Elysia didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her hands clenched at her sides. She had always been afraid of her power. It was too dangerous, too unpredictable. She had been taught to control it, to keep it locked away, to suppress it for fear that one day it would destroy everything around her. But now, as she stood here on Valter, surrounded by rebels, by strangers, by people who had nothing to lose, she couldn't deny it any longer. The power inside her was not just a part of her heritage, it was her destiny. "I don't know how to control it," Elysia said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been so long. Every time I try, it slips away from me. I don't know what it could do, what it might do." Marcus stepped closer to her, his expression soft but determined. "You don't have to do this alone. We're in this together." Elysia's gaze lifted to his, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Marcus wasn't afraid of her power. If anything, he was more determined than ever to help her unlock it, to help her embrace what she had been running from for so long. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. Elysia hesitated for a long moment, her mind racing. She had been betrayed by those she trusted most. She had been abandoned by her family, her people, the galaxy itself. And yet, here was Marcus, a stranger, offering her something she had never thought possible. Trust. She wanted to say yes, to embrace it, but the weight of her power, the danger it represented, made her hesitant. "I trust you," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "But I don't know what I'm capable of, and that terrifies me." Marcus placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the camp bustling around them. The rebels had begun to notice them more now, some giving curious glances, others whispering among themselves. Elysia could feel their eyes on her, could feel the weight of their judgment. She was a princess, yes, but she was also something more, a force that could either save or destroy everything she touched. As they walked deeper into the camp, Elysia's mind drifted back to the last time she had been here. She had been younger then, more hopeful. She had hoped that the rebels would help her, that they would fight beside her to reclaim her throne and restore her people. But that was before the betrayal, before her family had fallen and she had been exiled to this forgotten planet. But now, things were different. She wasn't just fighting for a throne anymore. She was fighting for survival, for her future, for the future of the galaxy. The power inside her wasn't something she could run from. It was something she had to embrace. The leader of the rebels, a woman named Celine, approached them as they reached the center of the camp. She was tall and strong, her face weathered from years of battle, but there was a fire in her eyes that made Elysia respect her immediately. "Elysia," Celine said, her voice commanding yet full of curiosity. "We've heard whispers about you, about the power you carry. We need to talk." Elysia nodded, her heart racing. This was it, the moment where everything could change. She had to face the truth, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. "Lead the way," Elysia said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "It's time we discussed what comes next." As they followed Celine to a large tent at the center of the camp, Elysia could feel the eyes of the rebels on her, each one of them silently wondering what kind of power they were dealing with. Some were intrigued, others wary. The galaxy had underestimated her for so long, but the power inside her was no longer something to hide. It was time for them all to see it. Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Where?" "A place," she said, her voice full of a quiet certainty that made Marcus feel a little less uneasy. "A planet on the edge of the galaxy. It's a haven for outcasts, rebels, and anyone who's been forgotten by the greater powers. They call it Valter, an ancient world, lost to most of the galaxy, but still alive. There are others there, others who have seen the galaxy for what it is and want to change it." "Rebels?" Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing. "You think they'll help us?" Elysia nodded slowly. "They may not want to help a royal princess," she said with a hint of bitterness, "but they'll understand what's at stake. They'll understand what it means to be forgotten." Valter. Marcus didn't know much about the planet, but he knew it had a reputation. It was rumored to be a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go, a place where people like Elysia could hide and heal, or, in some cases, gather strength for their fight. It wasn't a place of peace, but a place of rebellion. And rebellion, Marcus knew, was exactly what they needed. "We're going there," Marcus said, setting a course for the distant planet. "And we'll make allies, even if we have to drag them kicking and screaming." Elysia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let out a soft sigh, the weight of her past and the future ahead pressing down on her. She had never imagined that her destiny would take her down this road, that she would have to turn to strangers, people who had nothing to do with her former life, to help her find a way out of the galaxy's shadow. But as Marcus's ship sliced through the darkness of space, a small flicker of hope ignited in her heart. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had forgotten her for a reason. And now, it was time for her to make them remember. Hours later, they'd arrived at Volta. The planet was everything Marcus had expected: rough, untamed, and dangerous. Its surface was covered in craggy mountains, deep valleys, and vast deserts. The atmosphere was thick with dust, the air tinged with the scent of oil and smoke. But beneath the harsh exterior, Marcus could sense the pulse of life, a hidden community of those who had chosen to live outside the reach of the galaxy's control. The landing was rough, the ship bouncing as it descended onto a rocky landing pad, but they had made it. As the engines powered down, the sound of distant shouting and the hum of machinery filled the air. The planet was alive with the energy of rebellion. Elysia stood up, her eyes scanning the scene below. She had been here before, many years ago, when she was just a young princess looking for refuge. She had hoped never to return. But now she had no choice. The power inside her had drawn them here, and she would have to face her past if she wanted to survive the future. Marcus looked at her, his expression serious. "Ready?" Elysia met his gaze, her face steely. "No, but we don't have a choice." Together, they stepped out of the ship, walking into the heart of Volta's bustling rebel camp. The air was thick with the tension of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "We're here to change the galaxy," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And we'll need all the help we can get." But as they moved deeper into the camp, Elysia couldn't help but wonder what kind of help they would find. Would they find allies who would fight beside them, or would they find more betrayal? The galaxy had shown her its true face before, and she had no illusions about what it could do. But one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The battle for her destiny and the fate of the galaxy had only just begun. The secret power, the tension in the air, was thick as Marcus and Elysia made their way through the heart of the rebel camp on Volta. The ground beneath their feet was rough and uneven, the air filled with the faint scent of smoke and machinery. It was a world that seemed to exist in perpetual conflict, and as they moved deeper into the camp, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this place was a mirror of Elysia's own life, a battleground filled with those who had been forgotten and abandoned by the galaxy. Elysia walked beside him, her expression unreadable, her eyes scanning their surroundings. She had been here before, but it was different now. She wasn't just a princess seeking refuge. She was a woman running from her past, a woman who carried a secret power that could either save or destroy everything she cared about. She had been hiding it for so long, afraid of what it could do, afraid of what might happen if she fully embraced it. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Marcus asked, his voice low as they passed through a group of rough-looking rebels huddled around a fire. They eyed them warily, but no one spoke up. With every ounce of strength, Marcus pulled the ship toward the cloud, the vessel trembling under the assault of laser fire. Elysia's hands were gripping the edges of her seat, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the energy building inside her, an ancient force stirring within her, something powerful and untamed. It was now or never. Just as they entered the dense cloud, the ship's instruments began to flicker, the system losing power momentarily as they were enveloped by the ion storm. For a moment, the ship's entire body was cloaked in a sea of blue and purple energy, the hull buzzing with electricity. It was as if the storm itself was trying to keep them from passing. "We're through," Marcus breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually made it." But Elysia's expression didn't lighten. She knew the storm was only a temporary shield. The real danger wasn't the enemy fleet that chased them. It was the power inside her, the power that had begun to awaken and draw attention from all sides. "You're not safe yet, Marcus," she said, her voice low and serious. "I can feel them still coming, and they're not going to stop until they have me." Marcus looked at her, his face grim. "Then we'll fight. We don't have to run anymore." But deep inside, Elysia knew that their journey was just beginning. The galaxy had forgotten her once, but now they were coming for her. And this time, she wasn't running from her destiny. A desperate alliance. The ship cut through the stars, its engines humming steadily now that the ion cloud had provided temporary cover. Marcus kept his hands firmly on the controls, but his mind was elsewhere, racing through the events of the past hours. They had escaped, but at what cost? Elysia's words lingered in his thoughts. The galaxy had forgotten her, but the power she was bound to had only just begun to stir. Beside him, Elysia sat still, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. There was a quiet intensity about her, as if her thoughts were miles away, caught in the same storm of uncertainty that raged inside Marcus's mind. She hadn't said much since they had escaped, but her eyes were full of emotions she couldn't express. Fear, determination, and a deep, unspoken longing for something more. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. He didn't need to specify what he meant. He knew Elysia understood. Her eyes flickered to him, her expression unreadable. "Not long," she replied, her voice steady but heavy with an undertone of regret. "The factions will regroup. They'll be after us again soon. The power I carry, it calls to them. I can feel it. I can feel them closing in." Marcus clenched his jaw. He had known this wouldn't be easy. Nothing about their journey had been. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. The universe, it seemed, wasn't just chasing them. It was hunting them. And if they were to survive, they would need more than just speed and stealth. "Then we need allies," Marcus said, his voice firm. "And we need them fast." Elysia turned to him, her eyes searching his face, as if weighing the words before speaking them. "I don't trust anyone," she said quietly. "The galaxy has proven time and again that it's filled with betrayal. I can't afford to trust anyone. Not even you." Marcus didn't flinch at her words. He understood. She had been betrayed by everyone she once held dear. Her family, her people, the galaxy itself. It was no wonder she was reluctant to trust anyone. But he also knew that trust was the only thing that could save them now. "I get it," he said. "But I'm not asking you to trust everyone. I'm asking you to trust me. I've been with you since the moment I landed on this planet. I've seen what you can do, and I've seen what's at stake. We need to form an alliance, just one, but we need the right people." Elysia looked out the window again, her gaze distant, as though she were looking at something only she could see. "The right people," she whispered. "I think I know where we can find them." Her gaze hardened as she turned to face him, her voice trembling with something between fear and resolve. "The energy, it's not just power. It's a force that can consume everything around it. I can feel it, Marcus. If we don't stop it from fully awakening, it will destroy everything. The factions, the galaxy, us, everyone." A cold chill ran down Marcus's spine. The stakes had just risen higher than he could have imagined. He had thought they were merely running from mercenaries or bounty hunters, but now it seemed as if they were trying to outrun a force beyond their control. "We need to leave this planet, now," Marcus said, his tone urgent. "We can figure out what's going on later, but we have to get away from here before they catch up." Elysia didn't argue. She had been hiding here for so long, and now that the power was stirring within her, she knew her time on this planet was over. If they stayed, they would not just be risking their lives, they would be risking the entire galaxy. Together, they sprinted toward Marcus's ship. The sound of the ships drawing closer was unmistakable now. The sleek, silver vessels sliced through the air, cutting across the sky with a deadly precision. They were being hunted, and there was no time to waste. As they neared the ship, Marcus's hand hovered over the controls, his mind racing with calculations. He knew he had to get the ship off the ground, but the surrounding terrain was treacherous, filled with jagged rocks and thick vegetation. His ship wasn't built for such a landscape. "We'll have to make a run for it," Marcus said, looking at Elysia. "We won't be able to take off unless we clear the valley." If we don't get high enough, they'll shoot us down before we even leave the atmosphere." Elysia nodded, her face pale but determined. "I can help with that. I won't let them take us. Not after everything they've done." Just as they reached the ship, a blast of energy shot from the distance, striking the ground not far from where they stood. The ground cracked and splintered, sending a shockwave of dust and debris flying through the air. Marcus and Elysia both stumbled, but she quickly regained her balance, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "They're here," she said, her voice tight. "We don't have much time." Without another word, Marcus leaped into the cockpit and began powering up the ship. Elysia scrambled into the passenger seat, her gaze flicking nervously toward the horizon, where the enemy ships were closing in. They had no time to waste. Marcus punched the controls with urgency, his fingers flying over the buttons as he guided the ship toward the narrow gap between the rocks. The ship's engines roared to life, but they weren't out of danger yet. The sky above them was a storm of flashing lights as the enemy ships zeroed in on their location. "Hold on," Marcus shouted, pulling the ship into a steep climb. As they shot upward, the ground below them erupted in a series of blasts, explosions rippling outward as the enemy tried to strike them down. Elysia clenched her fists, her knuckles white, as the ship bucked and swerved under the onslaught of laser fire. The ship groaned under the pressure, but Marcus kept his focus, pushing the ship higher and higher, his eyes fixed on the sky ahead. He knew they couldn't outrun them forever, not with the fleet in pursuit. But there was one thing he had learned in his years of traveling. When you're running from danger, there's always an escape route if you know where to look. "We're almost there," Marcus grunted, his hand steady on the controls. "We just need to break through the ion cloud up ahead. Once we're in, we'll lose them." Elysia's breath came in shallow gasps, but she didn't look away from the view ahead. The sky above them was alive with energy, a storm of light and fire as the enemy ships closed in. The ion cloud was their only chance. If they could make it through, they would be cloaked in the dense particles, and the enemy wouldn't be able to track them. But as they neared the cloud, another wave of energy blasted the ship, this time striking the right wing. The ship lurched violently, throwing them both forward into their harnesses. Elysia's stomach twisted, and she fought to keep her composure. "We're not going to make it," she shouted, her voice filled with panic. Marcus gritted his teeth. "We will. We have to." "Power?" he asked, his interest piqued. "What kind of power?" Elysia stepped closer to him, her eyes intense. "The kind that can change the fabric of reality itself. My people had control over it once, but when they were defeated, they sealed it away to protect it. The power is bound to me now, but I don't fully understand it. I can feel it, though. It's there, inside me." A shiver ran down Marcus's spine as he considered her words. The power she spoke of was no ordinary ability. It was something far older, something that could reshape the universe. And if the wrong people discovered it, they would stop at nothing to control it. But it wasn't just the power that intrigued Marcus. It was Elysia herself. There was something captivating about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Her quiet strength, the way she carried herself despite her past, was magnetic. She was a survivor, yes, but there was so much more to her than what the galaxy had seen. Suddenly, the silence between them was broken by a low hum, a faint vibration beneath their feet. Marcus looked around, his senses on high alert. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Elysia's expression darkened, and she nodded slowly. "The energy is waking up. It's been dormant for centuries, but it's stirring now. I can feel it calling to me." Before Marcus could respond, a distant sound echoed through the air, something that didn't belong. It was a soft hum, followed by the unmistakable sound of engines. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. "They're here," Elysia whispered, her voice tight with fear. Marcus turned to face her, his mind racing. "Who?" "The ones who destroyed my family," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. The factions that want to control the power here. They've come to finish what they started. A cold rush of realization swept over him. They weren't just after Elysia. They were after the power she was bound to. The very force that could change everything. "We need to move," Marcus said, grabbing her arm gently. Now. Without another word, they hurried toward the cover of the ruins, the sound of the approaching ships growing louder. The galaxy had forgotten Elysia, but it seemed her enemies had never stopped searching for her, and now they were closing in. As they hid among the ancient stones, Elysia's mind raced. The power was awakening, and she knew that she had no choice but to face the past she had tried to outrun. But she wasn't alone anymore. Marcus was with her, and together they might just have the strength to take on the galaxy that had left them both behind. And so, as the night sky darkened above them, the first of many battles began. Battles not just for survival, but for the future of an entire galaxy. The escape. The ground beneath Marcus's feet trembled as the faint hum of approaching ships grew louder. It wasn't just the sound of engines, but the foreboding sensation that something dark and powerful was coming. The ruins around them seemed to close in, as if they too understood the danger that approached. Elysia, her face set with determination, moved swiftly, her small frame blending with the shadows of the ancient temple. She didn't need to be told twice. She had lived with the fear of this day for years. The day when the galaxy's factions would remember her, remember the power she carried, and come to claim it. "We can't stay here," Marcus said urgently, his voice low but sharp. "They'll find us if we don't move quickly." Elysia nodded, her eyes scanning the darkening horizon. "The power is awakening," she whispered. "It's drawing them in. We're not just running from them anymore. We're running from something far worse." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus felt the weight of her words. He could see it now, the loneliness in her eyes. She had been forgotten by the very universe that once worshipped her, but he wasn't like the others. He didn't see her as weak or broken. There was strength in her, a strength she hadn't yet unlocked. And he had a feeling she was more than just a forgotten princess. She was something far greater. "You're not forgotten by everyone," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I see you. I see you for who you really are." Elysia looked at him with surprise, her expression softening for the first time. "Why do you say that?" "Because," Marcus said, stepping closer, "I can see that there's more to you than what the galaxy sees. There's a fire inside you, a fire that hasn't gone out, and I'm not going to let you fade into the past." For the first time in years, Elysia's face softened into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Maybe this human, this stranger, could help her find the strength she had buried deep inside. As they stood there, the wind whispered through the trees, and the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. In that moment, both Elysia and Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had forgotten her, but he hadn't, and together, they were about to change everything. Whispers of the past. Elysia's words lingered in the air as Marcus watched her, trying to process the truth she had just shared. She was the last of her royal line, exiled and abandoned by the very people who once called her their ruler. The gravity of her words felt heavy, and yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she was willing to reveal. As the sun began to set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the temple ruins, Marcus turned to her. "You mentioned betrayal. Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with genuine curiosity. Elysia's expression grew distant once more, as if the question reopened a wound she had long kept hidden. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the twin moons were beginning to rise. The wind rustled the leaves of the ancient trees, their branches swaying gently. "The galaxy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't one person. It was an entire system of powerful factions, each one seeking to gain control of my people's resources, our knowledge. They betrayed us all for power, for wealth. I was their princess, their symbol of hope, but I became a threat to them. Marcus didn't know much about the galaxy's politics, but he could tell that whatever had happened to her people was far more complicated than just an attack. This wasn't just a simple power struggle. There was something deeper, something ancient. She paused for a long time, as if choosing her next words carefully. My family tried to fight back. Elysia continued, her voice growing stronger, though the pain was still evident. But we were outnumbered. They came for us in the dead of night, ships with weapons far more advanced than anything we had. My parents, they died protecting me. Marcus could see the weight of the memory on her shoulders. She was a survivor, yes, but she carried the scars of that night with her. The galaxy had turned its back on her, and she had been left alone to wander the farthest reaches of space, a princess with no kingdom. Then they exiled me, she whispered, almost to herself. I was hidden away on this planet, forgotten by those who once adored me. They wanted me to fade away, to die in silence. Marcus shook his head, incredulous. But why here? Why this planet? You could have gone anywhere. Elysia turned her gaze to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dimming light. Because this world was chosen for me. It's not just any world. It's the heart of an ancient power, the power that once sustained my people. The energy here is ancient, Marcus. It flows beneath the surface, and it's waiting to be awakened. The idea of ancient, hidden power intrigued Marcus. He had always been fascinated by the mysteries of the universe, but this was something different. This was a living force, something that could reshape the galaxy itself. The Forgotten Princess. The galaxy was a vast, endless place. Worlds upon worlds, stars beyond count. Yet despite the size of it all, some things, and some people, were easily forgotten. One such being was a tiny alien princess, hidden away on a small, seemingly insignificant planet, far from the bustling hubs of galactic power. Her name was Elysia. To most of the universe, she was nothing, a mere blip on the radar, if she was even noticed at all. The powerful factions of the galaxy had long since abandoned her. To them, she was just another exiled princess, lost to time. Her royal line had been destroyed in a brutal coup many years ago, and she had been cast aside, forgotten by the galaxy she once ruled. But none of that mattered to one man. He was a traveler, a wanderer who had seen countless worlds, but none quite like this one. His ship, a simple craft, had barely enough fuel to make it to the edge of the planet's atmosphere, but the mysterious pull of the world below had drawn him in. Something about it called to him, though he didn't know why. His name was Marcus, and he didn't believe in fate. But in this moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here. As his ship descended, the landscape below was both beautiful and desolate, rolling hills of purple grass, vast forests with trees that seemed to shimmer, and skies painted with strange hues of orange and blue. It was peaceful. Too peaceful, perhaps. Marcus couldn't understand why such a tranquil place had been left behind by the galaxy's rulers. He landed in a clearing near an ancient stone temple, its ruins half buried in the overgrown vegetation. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the soft ground. There was a strange sense of silence here, as if the world itself was holding its breath. As Marcus made his way toward the ruins, he noticed something unusual, a figure standing alone in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a mirage, but as he drew closer, the figure became clearer. It was a young woman, standing still as a statue, her gaze fixed on the sky. She wore simple robes, nothing like the extravagant attire of the royalty Marcus had seen in his travels. Yet there was something regal about her, something that set her apart from anyone he had ever met. Her eyes glowed softly, a strange pale color that seemed to flicker with an inner light. As he approached, the woman turned her head slowly, as if she had been waiting for him. She didn't speak, but her gaze met his with an intensity that made Marcus feel like she could see right through him. It was as though she was reading his soul. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking the silence. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to ask. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful, almost as if she wasn't entirely of this world. Marcus didn't back away. There was something about her presence that felt familiar. Even though he had never met her before, he felt like he knew her. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I am Elijah," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I am the last of my kind." Marcus didn't understand. "The last of your kind?" he repeated, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Elijah looked down at the ground for a moment, her expression distant, as though she was recalling a painful memory. "I am a princess, or I was. The galaxy has forgotten me, abandoned me." Marcus felt a pang of sympathy. He didn't know much about the politics of this world or why it had been forgotten, but something in her words resonated with him. She wasn't just another exiled royal. There was something deeper, something more personal in her tone. "But why are you here?" Marcus asked. "Why have you been left alone like this?" Alicia's eyes darkened as she looked up at him, her gaze intense. "I was betrayed," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My family was destroyed, and I was cast out. The galaxy, those who once called me a princess, no longer care. They moved on, but I remain."